Let me now bring on Brother Baraka. Brother, it's an honor and a pleasure to have you on my show.
Well, brother, it's a pleasure to be here also, but I got to correct a couple of things because I don't want people to think I'm
Yes,
perpetrating. So, on my wiki, what's that called? The Wikipedia.
Wikipedia page. Yeah.
Yeah, so they got me as a PhD, and I try to change that, but no, I'm not like you, brother. I don't have a doctor. I don't have a doctorate. I got a street doctorate at this point.
That's right. You got a doctorate in struggle, brother.
There you go.
Learned through lived experience in fighting for our people. There you go.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So we try and keep this space informal. So I try to go with brother and sister for the most part, our first names. Now, the first thing I want to say to you is how much I appreciate your work,
Appreciate it.
especially the commitment to, and this is a quote I think from BAP's website, to recapture and redevelop the historic anti-war, anti-apartheid, anti-imperialist, and pro-peace positions of the radical Black movement, unquote. So now, as with all my guests, I want you to be comprehensive, right? I want you to feel the sense to spread out and contextualize your answers. But at the same time, I want to urge you to also be as succinct as possible. What I'd like to be able to do is sometime around 8 o'clock, 8:05, go to the questions from the audience or actually participants and have you begin to engage those. So that requires that first hour you be, somewhat tight. Second, I'm a devotee of Bill Cross, William Cross's negrescence theory in terms of African American identity formation, what used to be called the Negro to Black conversion process.
Mhm.
So because I am so much into Cross's methodology and theory, I always start my interviews by asking the guests to talk about how they became who they are, right? Revolutionaries aren't born, they're made through struggle,
Exactly.
conscious,
Exactly.
shaping. So you're
Mhm.
born and grew up on the historic South Side of Chicago. You also fought in the Vietnam War. So can you discuss for us how you're being raised on Chicago's South Side during the mid 50s, 60s, and 70s, service in Vietnam, and your class background? How did those things influence your intellectual decisions, political science as a area of study?
Mhm.
And,
Mhm.
and more importantly, well, equally importantly, your social movement commitments to a radical Black international politics. Now, if you can, I'd like you to be able to talk very specifically about experiences, observations, mentors, readings, and processes that contributed to you selecting and developing that set of intellectual interests and political engagements.
Yeah. No, that's a good way to start because as you are absolutely correct. It's a process. It's a process for development for people who find themselves in the situation that we have found ourselves in North America, in or captured by a settler colonial project, a project that has at its core the objective to basically make us Negroes, to
Mhm.
ensure that we will be orderly slaves. And so some of us remain at that level. Some of us turn into what I call niggers. I was a nigger for about 3 years.
Okay,
Some of us,
explain what you mean by that.
they're growing up on the south side of Chicago. You get subjected to all kinds of influences. And, while my family was a good race family, with good race politics, if you will, in terms of, Garveyism and the Nation of Islam and pride in ourselves and uplift and serving the community, as a young brother and some, many times young sister. you get caught up in other kind of stuff, and so as a teenager growing up on the south side of Chicago, because where I stayed at, not only was I on the south side of Chicago, we ended up in some of the roughest communities on the south side. People who are from Chicago would know when I talk about growing up on 43rd and Berkeley. Okay, that this was a place where we had to. It wasn't one of those what they call it kitchenette apartments, where they cut up a house and we shared like between three families. We had one, and back in those days, as y'all remember, our families were pretty large. We were considered to have a small family. There was five of us, okay, and all of us had to share one bathroom, okay. And so this is where I really began to see and experience the contradictions of what it means to be an African in the U.S. Now I started there because while we was having those kind of experiences, there was a commonality among all of us. We knew we were poor. We knew no one cared about us. But because of sort of the sort of class blend of many of our families, I had also in our family a petty bourgeois element. Okay, and so my uncle went into real estate. He bought a house. They bought a building that was on 72nd and Vernon. And, because of the whole family thing, we all ended up there. My grandfather, two of my uncles, and my uncle's mother-in-law and her sister, and they gave us the basement apartment. It
So
was
this
an
is kind
unfinished.
of like a classic Black extended family situation.
Exactly. But this is where the other element came in. So we ended up in the basement, a semi-finished basement, and in this community, even though it was a working class community, we for the first time really began to experience a class difference because we were absolutely dirt poor, you
Okay.
know. And so even though people around us were also working class, for us, they kind of seemed privileged, you know.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. And because of that too, the school that we ended up going to, because we were poor, for some of the teachers, not all of them, 'cause we had some good teachers, they almost expected you because you were like poor to act a certain kind of way.
Yeah.
And sometimes you began to act out just how they want you to act. Okay.
That's right.
So what happened was I began to I began to develop a class consciousness that it wasn't just about us being Africans, but there was something about this class structure too that was very, very interesting. Okay.
Mhm.
And that stayed with me. And that stayed with me as I went through what I call my nigger phase, which was I started about 15 and a half, and got into stuff that a lot of young brothers got into for a while.
Mhm.
But luckily I came out the other end. And coming out the other end meant I had to make certain sacrifices. So when I hit 18, I had a few things that happened to me, and it became clear to me I had to change. I
Okay.
was already becoming political, okay? I mean, the person that had the biggest
Well, what
impact
was
on
making you become political?
the person who had the biggest impact on all of us in the streets was Chairman Fred.
Ah, okay.
Okay, and while some of us weren't prepared to make the real sacrifice to transform ourselves at that moment, and to take up the chant, I am a revolutionary.
Hmm.
The politics that we've been exposed to were transformative. Okay, so it was Fred Hampton on that side. Another side, and it was also the sort of the nationalist elements that were there too. Haki Mahabuti and others who had these centers where you go and get exposed all kind of Black history and all of that. So this stuff was percolating in our heads. Okay.
Now, did you ever go to the Topographical Center,
Yes.
run by the RNA?
Yes. Now there were. Yeah. Now, are you talking about the one that's on like 75th and
Absolutely. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
first time I went there, brother, the first time I went there, I was so freaked out. I mean, it's like I felt like that they that we was they're gonna come get us the very next morning. It's like because they talked about the different railroads, or how those connected to the military installations. And yes,
the gun, the windows that they could use guns in Cabrini Greens, and yeah. The whole nine. It was like you
that was
said.
part of it. That was
It
very that was and they knew how to relate to us, you know.